Hello, everybody. My name is Brian of Hessens County, and today we are going to be. This is basically a second part to the character creation video that I created previously, where this time we're actually going to be making a character for Sageuk, Roleplay in Joseon, which is my tabletop RPG game that is set in, is based on uh, basically Korean historical dramas. Um, so the I actually needed to create a character with. I'm in the middle of making the quick start sort of adventures story arc for the for that will be released with the game. So I needed to create a character to try to kind of flesh out exactly how I think she's going to act. So today, basically, I'm going to be doing that with you guys. So I apologize if this is a little rough. I'm literally doing this as I go. so, so as you can see here, our character's name is Hyo. Um, at least as of this moment, that might potentially change. And basically, Hyo is from what I've created so far. Hyo is the daughter of a tomb keeper. Um, Now, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with this, the a lot of the Joseon kings, monarch royalty, were typically buried in sort of tomb mounds, which during the Joseon period were usually away, at least a little bit away from the actual like urbanized part of the capital, often further out in the countryside on like the sides of mountains and things like that. Usually you had to have a certain type of view. There was a lot of elements of pongsujiri, which is basically kind of like Korean feng shui, that kind of went into deciding where a tomb would be placed. Um, but because it was out in the countryside, normally there would be an appointed tomb keeper who would be the person who would kind of like maintain the tomb and guard it. Basically, make sure nothing bad happened. Reports to the palace if something really strange happened. Um, and yeah, so basically, Hyo is the daughter of a tomb keeper who's gone missing. Um, so I have a basic idea of who she is, but we're gonna kind of try to explore that a little bit together, basically. Now, if you have seen the previous video where I kind of explained the different elements, I'm gonna go through real quick just in case you haven't. So here, of course, we see there we have a character sheet, and on the character sheet we have over here. This is where the approaches go, which are basically kind of like the equivalent in another game of what you might have like an ability score. So it helps decide how many dice that you roll for the base number of dice that you roll for if you need to decide something happening in the game. Um, Skills go here. Our profession goes here. Obviously, we already have the name. We have the background, which is going to go here, along with their ability score. Or sorry, along with an ability that comes with the background. Drives go down here, and then our aspiration usually goes right here. Um, so normally when I create a character, I don't go in the order in which I mentioned the specific pieces. In the video previously where I mentioned the specific pieces, um, I'm going more by importance in the actual like creation, not in the order in which you should necessarily create the item or the character. Um, I know in a lot of games, quite often you might start off by like rolling the like let's say Dungeons and Dragons. You might start off by rolling your ability scores and then kind of going from there. But in Sageuk, because there's no rolling, it's just you deciding. Usually, I would go with kind of creating a character concept in your head, and then basically normally picking usually a profession next or a background, um, whichever feels more comfortable, and then kind of building from there. Unless you really know for sure exactly what this character is going to be from top to bottom right from the beginning, which is pretty rare, I find in my experience. Um, so today, because I know exactly what this character is going to be, normally again, like I said, normally I would start with a profession, but today I'm actually going to start with a background because I know what her background already is. She's grown up in the countryside, um, along with her father, who's the tomb keeper for this tomb, right? Pretty far off into the countryside. This game is set actually in Pajumok, which is Mok was basically a term for like a department, which was like a really big county, or something really important for the military. But in this particular case, today we mainly know it as Pajushi, which is a city, like on the border between North and South Korea, northeast of Seoul. Um, so yeah, like I said, today I'm actually gonna start with my background, and I'm looking over here because I do not have the whole thing memorized in my head. I have it over there, my manual for the game over there. Okay. I think the one that probably fits the best would be Country Noble. Because in order to basically become a tomb keeper, you kind of already had to have a government title, not like one of the big important guys who would have been working at the Capitol, but you would have at least been like I'm pretty sure like a local official, um, or maybe a really low level national official. Um, so like you would have passed a test and stuff like that. So I'm gonna say that they're probably a country noble. So I'm gonna write that down right here. And I'm thinking the way I kind of feel that their character is going to be. I'm thinking the ability. There's so for the country noble, there's two different abilities to kind of choose from. The first one is Sunbi, which is basically um, whenever you're trying to convince someone to change their mind, or you're pointing out that someone's doing something that's wrong, or criticizing someone for doing something that was wrong. Basically, it's easier, and also you can use a couple of different skills instead of just using, like, let's say, politics or other social skills. You can actually use your knowledge of literature and Confucian ritual, to basically point out moral problems with what they've done. The other one is prolific correspondence, which basically, as it kind of describes, you write to others a lot. Where basically, which was a really common thing to do at the time for intellectuals, especially who lived in the countryside, they would have like a wide group of, I guess you could basically call them like intellectual pen pals, where they would write a lot of letters to each other. Very regular correspondence going back and forth between friends in the capital or people living back home, or the maybe someone secret letters to someone who gotten sent off into exile or stuff like that. So in that one, basically, it's you can use things that you've learned from your letters. You can kind of recall back and once a session, kind of pull out a piece of information that you normally wouldn't know, just based on your personal experience, but something that somebody mentioned in a letter that's important for the plot. Um, like, oh, so and so wrote to me that things are really bad down in, Andong, or whatever, because there's a shortage of rice, or it could be anything, and that's potentially relevant. For this character though, I think Sungbi probably would be better. I kind of get the impression that she's pretty. She has a really clear vision of the way things should and should not go, which really fits like the Sunbi type really well. So I'm gonna go ahead and write that down. I'm not gonna write it all. Normally I would write out a basic little summary of what basically the way the ability works, but for now I'm just gonna write it down so I don't forget. Okay. And then because of that, I'm actually going to go ahead and add a drive. Normally, I would wait and finish everything else first and then start my drives and aspirations last. But in this particular case, I'm actually going to note that the drive is going to be Um, I'm gonna write down one of her drives being righteous. Just because she has, like I said, she's kind of headstrong. She's really youthful. She's supposed to be kind of like a mid to late teenager, but she's kind of lived in the countryside with just like a couple of farmers in a small village and her dad and other members of her family, and that's it. So she has a really clear vision of the way she thinks things should work in her head, and she hasn't really necessarily confronted that idea yet. That some of her ideas might not necessarily be right, or that she might have a that there might be other ways of doing things in other places that are still okay. So for next thing that I would normally do, which again, like I said, would normally be the first thing, is kind of picking out what the profession would be for a character. Um, and in this particular case, I think actually the best profession for her would probably be the worker. Which the worker is, it's originally I created the worker character, the worker sort of profession as an idea where this would be a good profession for someone who came from a background as being a servant or a farmer in the countryside or something like that. Um, the skills that you get automatically with it, because if you haven't watched the other videos, skills give you an extra die whenever you need to roll if to indicate you're proficient in it. And the profession gives you 4 skills. Then you pick 2 more skills and you get a survival skill based on whatever background your character came from, like where they lived. Whether it was like in a coastal town or you grew up in the countryside or like really far out, like out in the mountains, or you grew up in like, let's say, a big city like, Hansong, like the capital, Hanyang, or you grew up in the palace or in a really isolated area where you were kind of just surrounded by servants and that sort of an environment. Like maybe you're from a really rich family and you grew up on a family estate, something like that. So those are like the 5 different types of the survival skill. So yeah, I think worker probably would be best. She's probably spent a lot of time helping out her either helping out her mom, who actually at the time of the adventure, I hope at the time of the adventure, her mother has actually passed away recently. So she spent a lot of time helping her mom at home. She spent a lot of time helping her dad, um, with the actual like upkeep of the tombs and doing rituals and things like that. Because they actually have, in this particular case, it's actually unusual because there are actually 2 tombs that her father would have needed to keep upkeep because they were right next to each other. So yeah, I'm gonna say that she's probably the worker, and then I'm going to give her the couple of the extra skills I give her are going to kind of push her in a more sort of minor nobility sort of direction. So the 4 skills are, oh, here, I need to write that down first. The worker. And then let's see, we have handicrafts, athletics, and I apologize for my handwriting. I'm writing at a weird angle in order to get all the cameras to fit in. Humanity, which humanity is the social skill. It's the main sort of social interaction skill that you have when you're not dealing with like large groups of people. When you're dealing with large groups of people, we have another skill called politics, which again is like when which would also be used for actual, like, let's say, political manipulations or knowing people or things like that. Um, let's see, and then the fourth one is either Confucian ritual or, well, ritual with a Confucian uh, speciality, or spirits. Which in this case, because she's been dealing with a lot of Confucian ritual involving like the tombs and stuff, I'm gonna say that that would probably be more appropriate. There we go. Okay, and then, excuse me, we need to pick 2 more skills plus the survival skill. I'm gonna go ahead and write the survival skill down. because I already know where she's lived. She grew up in, Pajuk, which is, it's not like deep countryside, but it is very rural. At this time, Paju, the area around Paju, like the village of Paju, would have been very rural farming. The area is pretty famous for like soybeans and things like that. So a lot of farming pretty far away from the city, the main part of actual like what is today Seoul. So yeah, rural, but not so isolated that it's like deep countryside, sort of like having to hunt every day for survival, that kind of thing. All right. So yeah, we need two more skills. I would say probably another skill that would be useful for her would be tactics, which I know sounds kind of strange, but either tactics or finance. Because I'm thinking that she probably handles a lot of the logistics for her father. Like maybe not necessarily like going out, and especially when it comes to interacting with like the villages around her, around where they live, around the tombs, because they would be the people kind of coming in and doing their government labor service, helping to maintain the tomb. Whether it's repainting things, repairing stuff, cleaning moss off the stonework, that kind of thing. Um, so I'm thinking one or the other would probably be really helpful for her for logistical purposes. And I'm thinking maybe tactics might be better because tactics is more. I know tactics generally has more of a military feel to it, but it's really also intended to like discover for like organization, particularly of people, while finance is more for organization of things. So I'm thinking tactics might be best, um, particularly with the idea that she mainly uses it for like trying to organize people, find inefficiencies in what they're doing, stuff like that. Then finally, I'm thinking the last thing. I'm trying to decide between art and spirits. Spirits is basically Spirits would basically be an understanding of beliefs, or if there's any supernatural things happening in the game, kind of interacting with spirits and how and understanding how they work, what they do, why they do what they do, things that could potentially make them go away or get them to help you, stuff like that. Um, whether that kind of stuff is uh, whether that kind of stuff is necessarily like real actually happening in your game or just things that are kind of in people's heads or things that people just kind of really really strongly believe in, is kind of up to the group or the particular storyteller who's running the game. But the adventure I'm doing has a lot of sort of supernatural elements to it that are actually kind of really happening to people, or at least having a significant impact on the way people feel and believe and how they act. So I think actually giving her spirits would make sense. Okay. So normally, like I said, once I figured out the profession and the skills, I would probably go and do the actual um, approaches. Actually, do the approaches. And just to review, approaches are, this has to be each one of these gets a number between 1 and 3. The total of all of them has to equal 10, at least at the beginning of character creation. But anyway, a good way to do it is basically kind of in your head, put all of them at one, and then basically distribute 5 points amongst them. So like a lot of twos, maybe 1 3, um, or maybe like 2 3s, or 2 and 2 1s, or stuff like that. Let's see. So based on the things that I gave her, so just to review these real quick, daring is sort of like confrontational approaches. So like it could be combat or standing up for what you believe in. So based on the fact that she's righteous, I would say she probably has a pretty high daring score. Um, Understanding is just basically sort of like acting based on what you already know. So someone with a high understanding score is really comfortable using things that they've already learned to inform how they act. Sensitivity would be uh, just being really observant about things around you, being being comfortable with acting based on what you see and what you observe, how people around you are feeling, as opposed to what you know or the other things we talked about. Subtlety would be doing things small so that people don't necessarily notice what you're doing. Um, and adaptability would be basically being really good at the timing of things, being comfortable with having to wait when you need to and then act. Um, or adaptability also kind of applies to doing something brand new that you've never done before, um, without really any real preparation on experiencing this particular thing. So yeah, like I said, I think I get a feeling that she probably has a pretty high daring score. So I'm gonna put daring at 3. Um, and I think I would also probably put her subtlety at probably 1. Um, and then for now, I might change it later, but for now, I'm just going to go ahead and put everything else at 2. Which would mean, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right. Okay. Um, right. So then, last piece, I kind of usually do drives and aspiration together. In this case, I already know what her aspiration is. She wants to find her father. Because, like I said at the beginning, if you remember, her father's missing. That's one of the driving elements of the story. So, where is my father? I kind of get the feeling that she's really angry about the fact that her father's missing, because her father's kind of disappeared and saddled her with a lot of his job and responsibilities. Um, and it was already probably hard enough for just the two of them to kind of do it on their own. Because, like I mentioned earlier, her mother would have recently passed away, um, and potentially some siblings. I haven't decided necessarily on how far to take that, because of a recent outbreak of probably smallpox or something like that, which was really common in the time period to have just smallpox was really endemic, along with a couple of other diseases like measles and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, now would be I would kind of go through drives. I'm not necessarily going to do all 5 of them right now. I kind of want to necessarily keep 1 or 2 of them kind of free in case something pops up while I'm finishing writing the particular elements that she's involved with. Um, but like I mentioned, she's definitely pretty righteous. Um, she thinks she knows how things work. She thinks she knows the what's best, at least for her. Maybe not necessarily for other people, but definitely for her, and her family. Um, I would say probably she is also, and that also kind of pulls into the fact that she just keeps going and doing her thing, even with her dad gone, without really bothering anybody, without really telling anybody what's going on, because she doesn't necessarily want to hurt her family. Um, so I would say maybe she's also kind of protective. But I might not necessarily use the word protective to describe it. Maybe more like, oh, no, I know what we should say instead of protective. I'm going to put guardian, because that also kind of pulls into the fact that she takes her father's job seriously, and she kind of takes it on her own when her father disappears. Because if you haven't watched the other video, a drive is normally usually like one noun or a verb or an adjective that really kind of describes a person. So, for example, one of the quick start characters has the drive gambler. Um, Another one has the drive romantic. Um, Here, of course, we have, we have a noun, guardian, righteous, adjective, so basically kind of describing how elements that kind of combined together make up a significant portion of that character's personal identity, self identity. Um, Basically, think of the things, these are the things that if you were, like, for example, if you were to write your five drives as a person, what are the five most fundamental things to who you are and what you do? Who you are, what you do, or how you kind of see yourself. Um, Not necessarily positive things. They don't have to be positive things. They could be things you're trying to avoid. Like in particular, the character I mentioned earlier, where I mentioned that they're a gambler. They don't like the fact that they're a gambler. They don't want to do that. It's kind of like for them, it's basically become an addiction, because they in their past they have a history of risk taking and doing things that are reckless or that don't really fit in, and they enjoy doing things that don't fit into society. And at this time, gambling is like, you got caught gambling a couple of times, it would be really, really serious punishments for you. It was like against the rules. They would rip down gambling houses and all kinds of stuff. So for a person, for him, it probably started out as a fun thing to do that was kind of, risque or whatever, but now it's kind of become an addiction, um, for that particular character. But anyway, going back to Hyul, getting distracted. Just from what I've written so far, I get a feeling another element that would probably be appropriate here would be maybe labeling her as a loner. Not necessarily because she wants to be, but just because she's lived out in the countryside with basically her and her dad for the last couple of years. Before that, it was basically just her family. There are people in the village down on the bottom of the mountain, but they don't necessarily have the best of relationships with each other. Um, so in this case, I think this would be one of those things where we have a drive for a character that's not necessarily what they would think of as being a positive thing, but it's still a thing that affects their character and is part of their identity. This might be something where if this was an actual character, like player character, maybe at some point in the future this would be a drive that the player would actively be trying to change about the character, through the course of play, either by accepting others into their sort of like little kind of creating a social circle around them, kind of creating a sense of belonging for them, and maybe in an organization in the game. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave the other two empty for the time being, just to give me something to think about and some room to kind of make some adjustments as the character goes along. But normally, again, you would have five drives at the start of play. Again, you can kind of change your drives if you're not comfortable with them. Your aspiration also can change. Usually, I would suggest that you kind of play with the aspiration you have at least until the end of the story arc, and then switch it. And just to clarify, a story arc a story arc could be one session. It could be more than one session. It really depends on kind of the flow and how things end up going. But basically, think of a story arc as being kind of like if this were a TV show, right? You'd have a full season, and each character would have their own sort of emphasis story arc. And the story arc would basically be usually 1 to 3 episodes where the group or the character, if it's just one character, would be addressing a particular issue. A particular situation's come up and you're kind of going through it, stuff like that. So it could be one session with playing, could be 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. It really depends on how long it takes for your group to kind of address things and how long each of your sessions go. Whether it's 2 or 3 hours or all day, who knows? Um, but yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me for this. I apologize for things getting a little bit rambly. As I said, I'm doing this live and off the cuff. There's no script, there's no anything except just already having a basic idea of how the character was going to turn out. And thank you all very much for joining me. If you want to potentially check out this game after having watched this video, links to the game will be in the description down below. If you'd also like to check out the blog that I run, or if you want to look at any other materials that I've made, those will also be down below, along with a coffee if you want to, pitch me a couple bucks to support me in this work. Or I'm also looking to expand the different types of videos that I make, looking at different games or sort of like live plays of solo RPGs or things like that. So again, thank you all for joining me, and I hope you all have a good zone.